So if I screw something up, oh, it can become a cloud. You don't want it to have to become, you know, a diving kamikaze or whatever. You want to be natural to whatever the subject is. So back here, I'm using the vertical brush strokes because I know it's a bunch of cliffs that, if you look in there, have a lot of vertical lines. So if I mess something up and I do it in a vertical direction, I can probably fake it and make it into something, you know, that makes sense. And if I don't mess it up, it gives me that little sort of subtle texture that people will interpret as being some structure in the distant cliff, even though you didn't bother to paint it in. And the reason for all these brush strokes, as I said, is because I started out with a fairly heavy underlayer of burnt sienna from when I painted this stuff in. And then I put purple on top, mostly ultramarine blue and a quinacridone magenta. So it was more purple over there and more brown over here. And I'm just sort of evening it up. And it's getting dry enough. It's got a little bit of a glisten to it, you can probably see, but not a lot. And if I were to add water in now, I'd have a horrible bloom problem. So I have to be careful about what I'm doing at this point. I'll probably let it sit. I'm not going to mess in here that much. It looks to me like it's a pretty good match for the overall tone of those distant cliffs. The right general color and everything. You notice that I put no detail in that at all. If you look at your photograph, I mean, there's just all kinds of really lovely detail back there in the background. You got to be really careful not to be tempted to put all that in, because otherwise that's the only place people would want to look. It's a temptation because it's pretty, you know. But you can accomplish the suggestion of that in just a few little places later on by doing some strategic lifting of lip lines and things, and I'll go into that later. But by and large, if you sort of squint at it from a distance, you can't see any of that detail. So you don't want to show up that detail real strongly when you're finished painting. It can be there, and you can fool people into thinking that you spent a long time painting it, but you don't want to actually spend a long time painting it, because otherwise it's going to look fake. It's going to look overworked. One person who's really, really good at that kind of thing, you don't see his landscapes much. There's a fellow named Steve Hanks. I don't know if you've seen this, you know, Albuquerque.
Big oils.
Mm-mm.
Are they oils?
No, they're watercolor. Yeah, they look like oil.
Yeah.
Although nowadays he he paints watercolors. He does a lot of glazing and some kind of varnishing on top, so there's enough to use glass on it. But it's all watercolor. But he'll do things that have a landscape background, and he'll have things in the distance, and from across the room, I mean, it just looks like he's painted in all this really, really intricate detail, and you go up and look close, and none of it's actually there. It's just, you know, a few quick things. And he's a lot more patient than I am, so he paints them more than I do, but still the name of the game is faking it, you know, you try to fool people. Okay, now I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to sort of start on what we'll be doing a lot of this afternoon. And it's probably, aside from the wet on wet washes, it's the thing that I really, really would like people to take away from this, because it's such a useful trick and it works so well, but it's foreign to most people. And I think it was in the exercises. I call it various things, puddle washes and with complicated edges, or I can't think of a compact phrase. What I do is I'll take a shadow area, say, Okay, there's a long shadow area here. You can all see this on your photograph. Actually, if you look at this whole cliff area, it's a series of very sharply outlined structures, shadows, okay? And what I want to be able to do is to paint them in and at least give the illusion that I've painted in every tiny little detail in that rock. But I don't want to have to actually do it. And I want it to show up as a very strong composition without having the details overwhelm the whole painting. So what you do is you put a puddle on the paper of the color. I'll just start out with some burnt sienna. And I'm just putting a sort of a big blob here. I'm going to get a bunch of water on my brush. I don't know if you can see it, and I'm just going to drop it in here. So, okay. And I'm bringing this puddle out short of the edges of where the dark area in this rock is, an area of the rock that's in shadow, okay? I'm painting this a little lighter right now. And what I'm doing right now is I'm just putting a lot of paint on paper in the center of this dark area. I'm not anywhere near the edges. And you'll be watching me do this over and over and over and over. And come Sunday, when we start looking at various paintings and pictures that people have, I'll use this trick in all sorts of different places. And so I hope that you really pick up on this one. Okay, I got this bunch of paint here that I put on with, you know, a brush like this. Sometimes I'll, if I have a big area, I'll use a big brush or even just pour a little bit of paint and water on the paper. And then I can take a tiny, tiny brush. I have a smaller one than this, in fact, somewhere, like a 00. And I can take this paint and draw it out. And I'm just drawing like I'm using a pencil, or I'm drawing out all the details at the edge of this area. Actually, I should have brought a tiny brush. Excuse me. If I had a 2-hair brush, I'd use it. Sorry for my voice. What I'm accomplishing here is I can put a lot of paint on the paper with a big brush or whatever, and I got this puddle. And then I can take a tiny, tiny brush, and I don't have to keep doing this. In other words, you know, I'm not getting a half a gallon of paint off my palette, a tiny brush at a time. I got a big puddle on my palette, and all I'm doing is playing the edges of the puddle. Like a little kid with his boots sort of stomping around making splashes. I'm just and I can draw the finest details in a really big wash because I'm not having to constantly pick up paint. It's one analogy that I think is useful here is that if you're building a big brick wall, you don't set your whole brick supply a quarter mile away from the wall and then walk over one brick at a time. You bring up a giant pile of bricks right next to where you work, and then you just do this. And that's what we're doing here. It takes the palette out of the equation, and that way you can use a tiny brush that doesn't hold any paint, and you can draw details by using what you've already got sitting on paper. And it's very easy to underestimate how powerful that can be, because you don't realize how much time you spend doing this. And the other thing is, you've got the paint on the paper, you never have to take your eyes away from what you're painting. You're not, you know, and I can get in a lot of trouble, you know, something's happening on my painting and I'm over here looking around in my palette for, okay, where do I get this exact color? So let me show you how fast this can be.
What size brush are you using as a small
One that's bigger than I would prefer. Apparently left my tiniest brush at home. This one here is a 0. I have one that I think is called a double 0 that's actually smaller and has a much sharper point than this one. But I'm going to make myself a nice big puddle of mostly burnt sienna that's sort of slightly grayed off here. I got more quinacridone magenta in there.
What do you create the burnt sienna with?
The ultramarine grays the burnt sienna off, although it does turn a little bit greenish, so you want to put in a bit of magenta. Okay, now I got a fair amount of paint there, so I'm going to go into this area, and I can change the color, of course, while it's on the paper. I'll go into this area here too. I think I need more burnt sienna here. I do need to beware of splashing things in the sky. I got 7 minutes. Now, don't ask me what colors I'm using because I'm slopping them on here so fast that I don't always keep track because I adjust the colors in doing this anyway. Okay, I take my tiny brush and I'm just sort of pulling this thing out. I'm drawing the structure with a paint that's already on the paper. Now, one of the reasons that you can get away with this, and actually when you're done, have a painting that looks very, very detailed, is because the details that really catch people's eye are not within the shadow area, and they're not in the bright sunlit area, they're on the transition. You're trying to convert the picture into a bunch of masses of color, big blocks of things, and you want to draw people's attention to the edges because that's where you can take this little brush, you can do all the tricks. Plus, you have a much more coherent, pleasant looking picture because you've abstracted a design by taking these big blocks of color and as I said, putting the details in the shapes rather than taking a dry brush and painting every little detail in the shadow, every little detail in the sunlit area, where then you lose the whole structure of the painting in the details. I know I'm running on. I don't know if this makes sense yet. Does all that sound too garbled to people?
No, that's good.
And I do wish I had a tinier brush because it would be more impressive. And the other thing is you can use gravity and letting some. Am I in the way?
No, there's not any small.
It's got a sharper point, like I said. Thank you. It's a little bit flexible, but it'll work okay. You can tilt the paper. As I said, this is a very wet puddle of paint. It's running like all those other wet on wet washes, but it's wet on dry. It's a big puddle on dry paper, and the edges can be as sharply defined as I want them to be. And that's why I can tilt the paper. It runs down. It gives me a bead of water right next to where I want to work, and I can use this small brush, move it around, do pretty much anything I want. And then if I have, say, I've got another shadow area up here and I don't even feel like getting the paint from the palette, I can pick up paint out of this and put it over here. See what I'm doing? Here's an interesting thing. Okay, I take this paint and I put it in this other shadow area. And then I noticed, well, you know, this other shadow area is probably about a mile further distant. So I wanted a little more purple, so I'm going to take some of that paint out and put it in a closer rock. And then I've already outlined the edges of that, and I can just get a little bit of ultramarine blue and drop it in here and make it look more distant. I'll do this whole thing with fly, kind of. See, so far I've been doing this particular exercise, I think, for about 7 minutes. Excuse me. A little bit of red and purple in here. See, I can, now that I've defined the edges, I can drop pretty much any color I want in the middle of it, and it's okay. You want to be careful, as I said, about dropping a lot of water into the middle of any wet wash, because it does push the paint to the outside, and it makes it look ugly. But again, part of the key is to get in, get out, do it fast, and leave. The biggest sin in the watercolor really is overworking it. Okay, this is still right here. Alright, so all these areas, as I said, I have put a big puddle in there with a big brush, and I take a tiny brush and I move around the edges. And I'm going to show you as the sort of the last 5 minutes, we're running a little bit into lunch. In a real dark area, I can just go ahead and I can take paint straight from the palette, put it in here. In fact, it drives some people nuts if I have a real black area on the painting. I'll take a tube of paint and I'll squeeze it on the painting. No, but that's so you know, paint and water, you know, it doesn't matter how you apply it, you know, it matters where it lines up. And where it's really dark, as I said, I can just sort of stick it in here. I'm not sure whether that's the color I want or not. I'll take a slightly bigger brush and I'm going to, looks a little blue. Oops, not enough water on that. Now it's plenty. I'll use the big brush to get the rough outline of this shape here.
Fearless.
Well, as I said, it's dark. You know, this you look at this area over on the left side of the picture, those are really dark. So it's the darkest in the camera. So they can afford to be almost black. And as I said, you could squeeze paint straight out of the tube, and okay, so it's going to leave streaks and stuff that's black anyway. You shouldn't really be afraid of the areas in the painting that are going to be black, because you can paint them opaque anyway. Whatever mistakes you make, you can cover up. Okay? Now I do have a puddle. I don't want to tilt it that way, because then I'm in serious trouble, obviously. But I'm going to get a shape defined here, and try to, I'm looking at all these shadows and rocks, and I'm trying roughly to get the shape that we're looking at. I've got some, okay, well, the paint that I didn't want there. I must be getting hungry, I'm punching. Here, okay, now that's it. Shape is roughly correct. I'm going to pour off the excess. kind of blue looking. I think I'm going to drop some burnt sienna and some red in here. And as I said, this is over here. This is going to be very dark. So I can get away with being pretty sloppy. I can always go back and change them. These areas in here have a little bit crisper detail, and so I want to get them right. And then I'm back to Jerry's little brush. If I had used this little brush throughout, as I said, there's no way I could have gotten this much paint on the paper in less than a couple hours. That color looks a little deadly dull to me now, but as I said, it's going to be so dark I'm not worried about it too much. You'll notice that as the rock turns towards the sunlight, off on the left side of your photograph here, that transition zone from dark to light is where the brighter color is. And again, because I want to draw everybody's attention to these edges, which is where I'm putting in all the detail, all the work, all my effort is going to be on these edges between the dark and the light. Big masses of color, complicated edges, and I want people to look at where I've put all this structure in the edges, so I make them brighter color also. The color draws your attention. And in this case, if you look at, can you see that on the monitor? This area right in here on the picture is sort of a brighter orange, and so is this area down there, where it goes from the dark to the light. That's where you've got this really bright, intense color on the rock. And so I'm going to